My brother-in-law tried to take my land through the county for 1% of its value after I spent 12 years building it. It's worthless, he said, so I made sure it cost him. Hey Reddit, long-time lurker, finally ready to share this. Everything wrapped up about 8 months ago, and I've been waiting until the dust settled before posting. Names and some details changed for obvious reasons, but everything else is exactly how it happened. Name's Leon, 40 male. It all started when I was 26, 2 years married, working as a union lineman. I bought 15 acres of steep, rocky mountain land in western North Carolina for practically nothing. That land changed my whole life. The property was the kind that made real estate agents shake their heads and walk away. Too steep to build on without engineering work that would cost more than the land itself. Too rocky for pasture or conventional agriculture. Wrong elevation and soil composition. For tobacco, corn, or anything that made money in these mountains traditionally. The previous owner had inherited it from his grandfather and paid taxes on it for 20 years without ever setting foot on the property. When I offered $12,000 cash, he couldn't sign the paperwork fast enough. Lineman work pays well if you're willing to climb poles in January ice storms and pull 16-hour shifts when transformers blow and half a town loses power. I was willing. Storm restoration calls took me to Florida, Louisiana, anywhere the union sent crews. The safety culture kept me alive up there on the poles, and the steady paychecks built my escape plan month by month. I lived cheap. 1-bedroom apartment with secondhand furniture, 10-year-old Ford Ranger, rice and beans most nights. My coworkers thought I was either broke or crazy, saving money like I was preparing for the end of the world. I saved 70% of every paycheck because I wanted land of my own, something nobody could take from me. My wife Harper thought I'd genuinely lost my mind when I showed her the property I wanted to buy. The land sat on a north-facing slope in the Blue Ridge foothills, about 40 minutes from Asheville on roads that got sketchy in winter. Accessible only by a rutted gravel road that washed out every spring. No utilities anywhere close. No flat ground bigger than a basketball court anywhere on the entire 15 acres. Just rocks, rhododendron thickets, and scrubby hardwood trees clinging to the mountainside. Harper stood at the edge of the property that first day, looked at the slope disappearing into the trees, and asked what exactly I planned to do with it. So, what's the plan here? Because I'm not seeing a house, a road, or anything remotely normal. You're looking at it like a problem. I'm looking at it like a setup. A setup for what? A twisted ankle? For a business. Give me a few years and you'll get it. I married a man with ambition and zero fear. That's concerning. I saw Christmas trees. That north-facing slope with rocky, well-drained soil at 3,000 feet elevation. Perfect growing conditions for Fraser firs. The choose and cut farms scattered across these mountains pulled in serious money during the 6 weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Families drove hours from Charlotte, Atlanta, even Florida to cut their own trees, buy wreaths and garland, make memories they'd repeat every year. Fraser firs took 8 to 12 years to reach prime selling height, which is why nobody new entered the market. Too long to wait for your first real paycheck. I had patience. I had a union job funding the operation for as long as it took, and I had 15 acres that nobody else wanted because they couldn't see what I saw. The first 3 years nearly broke me physically. Every day off meant clearing brush and hauling rocks, cutting drainage channels to prevent erosion on the steep sections, terracing the more gradual slopes into plantable rows by hand. I'd work 12 hours on the power lines, drive an hour to the property, and clear brush with a chainsaw until dark made it too dangerous to continue. My hands stayed torn up from saw work and granite edges. I dropped 20 pounds I couldn't afford to lose. Some nights I'd sleep in my truck because I couldn't drive home safely. Year 3, I planted my first round of 2,000 Fraser fir seedlings by hand, each one about 18 inches tall, root balls wrapped in burlap. Nearly half died that first summer because I didn't understand my own drainage patterns yet. The low spots held too much moisture and root rot took them. I replanted the following spring with better site selection and planted another 1,500 seedlings in a new section I'd cleared. Years 5 through 7, I learned the real work of Christmas tree farming, shearing trees every summer to shape them into the dense, symmetrical forms customers expected, spraying for balsam woolly adelgid, mowing between rows, fertilizing at the right times. Each task had specific timing or you'd set the whole operation back a year. I kept planting new sections each spring, building inventory for the future. By year 9, my oldest trees from that first surviving batch reached 6 feet. I'd planted additional rounds every subsequent year, so I had trees at different stages of maturity across the property. The farm started looking like an actual operation. That's when Harper's brother Peter started coming around more often once the farm began taking shape. He'd grown up in the county, knew everybody from the sheriff to the county clerk, worked in real estate and general contracting. The kind of guy who always had a deal working. He'd walk my tree rows and comment about how much work I was putting into land that wasn't worth much on paper. Said it friendly enough, but something about the way he assessed the property always felt like calculation rather than compliment. Year 10, I sold my first Christmas trees to the public. Simple choose and cut operation with a warming shed I'd built from scrap lumber, a cash box bolted to a table, handsaws available for customers who didn't bring their own. That first season, I cleared $8,000 in 6 weeks. By year 12, the transformation was complete. I had Fraser firs in full rotation across the entire 15 acres, with new seedlings going in every spring to replace what I harvested each winter. The inventory in the ground represented over 7,000 trees at various stages of maturity, from knee-high transplants to 9-foot specimens ready for prime customer. I'd built a proper farm store with insulated walls, a wood stove for heat, and display racks for the wreaths and garland I made from harvest trimmings. Nothing went to waste. Branches from cut trees became wreaths. Smaller trimmings became garland sold by the foot. Even the stumps got ground into mulch I sold to landscapers. Added hot-spiced apple juice and kettle corn on weekends because families lingered longer when they had something warm to drink and snack on. Longer visits meant more purchases. Hosted school field trips in October and November, teaching kids about sustainable forestry and mountain ecology. Scout groups came for service projects helping with maintenance in exchange for camping on the property. The County Tourism Board featured us in their seasonal marketing materials alongside the established operations that had been running for generations. I quit the lineman job at the end of year 12. Hardest decision I ever made, walking away from union benefits and a guaranteed paycheck. But the farm was generating more annual revenue than my line wages, and I couldn't manage both anymore. Harper handled store operations and customer experience, while I managed trees and maintenance. We worked well together. Our marriage was solid, built on shared purpose. Years 13 and 14, business grew steadily. Repeat customers brought their own kids now. We expanded the store, added a small event space. Local papers did features on the linemen who'd turned worthless mountain land into a destination farm. Then the county sent a letter about property line discrepancies, and Peter's helpful suggestions started feeling calculated. The letter arrived in early March of year 13, mixed in with seed catalogs and equipment invoices. Official county letterhead, formal language about reviewing property boundaries due to potential survey errors from decades ago. The letter suggested our property might be smaller than our deed indicated. Some of our land might fall within an unrecorded county right-of-way. I called the assessor's office and got transferred between 4 different people before someone would actually discuss the letter. A woman with a bored voice said these reviews happened periodically when the county updated GIS mapping systems. Routine verification. Nothing to worry about. I worried. The government doesn't send certified letters about property boundaries unless someone has a reason to question them. That Saturday, Peter showed up while I was checking trees in the upper field for winter damage. Heard you got a letter from the county. Those things can turn into a mess fast. It's just a boundary review, supposedly. Sure. And sometimes supposedly turns into sign here. Why do you care all of a sudden? Because you're family. And I know how this county plays. His eagerness felt wrong. Peter had always been mildly interested in the farm, but never this invested in county paperwork. At dinner, I mentioned his visit to Harper. She said Peter knew the county government better than anyone and was genuinely trying to help because we were family. Said I should take him up on it instead of being stubborn about handling everything myself. I didn't call Peter. Instead, I drove to the county clerk's office and started pulling records. Our county has a public portal for most documents, and anything else came with a simple written request. Surveys, deed chains, transportation committee minutes going back 3 years. 2 weeks later, it clicked. The county had been discussing a road improvement project for nearly 2 years, widening and realigning the main route to the interstate, eliminating curves that had seen accidents, legitimate on paper. But the proposed alignment didn't follow the existing road. It cut across private property, requiring land from 7 owners. My 15 acres sat in the middle of the preferred corridor. A developer called Consolidated Mountain Properties had been buying land on both sides of the proposed route for over 2 years. Their preliminary development plans showed a resort needing direct highway access. The road project wasn't about safety. It was about building infrastructure for private development with public money. Commissioner Eckert's financial disclosures showed a consulting relationship with Blue Ridge Advisory Group. State corporate records showed Blue Ridge was a subsidiary of Consolidated Mountain Properties. Then I found Peter's name, buyer's agent for 3 of Consolidated Mountain's acquisitions totaling over $2 million. Peter wasn't helping me navigate a process. He was working for the people trying to take my land. I told Harper what I'd found that night. showed her Peter's name on the transactions, the timeline connecting his deals to the road project. She listened, then said there had to be an explanation. Peter did real estate all over the county. Maybe he'd taken the listings without knowing about the bigger picture. Said I was connecting dots that might not connect. I understood her position. He was her brother. But I asked her to be careful what she shared with him until we understood more. 2 weeks later, Commissioner Eckert and 2 officials showed up at my farm unannounced. They stayed near the driveway and the public-facing areas, acting like it was an official site visit. Technically, they hadn't crossed into the fields, but it was still my property, and they hadn't asked permission. They photographed buildings and trees from where they stood, asked questions about my operation. Eckert mentioned the county would make offers soon, said they preferred working cooperatively. I asked what kind of figure they were thinking. We're looking at something in the $15,000 range for the land, plus a little for improvements. You're joking. I'm not. That's what the appraisal supports. My trees alone are worth more than that standing here. We're not buying your business. We're acquiring land. I asked him to walk me through that calculation. The county's appraiser had used comps for undeveloped mountain land. Steep terrain, limited access, no utilities. $800 to $1,200 per acre, adjusted down further for our slope and access difficulty. Base land value, roughly $15,000. Add depreciated replacement cost for buildings, subtract for access issues, and that was their number. The appraiser never set foot on the property. Assessment based on records and aerial photography. I pointed out this wasn't undeveloped land. It was a working Christmas tree farm with 12 years of inventory in the ground. Over 7,000 trees at various stages of maturity, representing tens of thousands in seedling costs, soil amendments, shearing, pest control. My accountant had valued the operation as a going concern at just over $2 million when I refinanced the previous year. Their offer was barely 1% of that. Eckert said trees were considered agricultural crops attached to condemned land, valued at salvage cost, not retail. Business goodwill wasn't compensable in eminent domain proceedings. The county was acquiring land, not a business. I asked if their appraiser had any experience valuing working agricultural operations rather than raw dirt. He said I should think carefully about my options and consult with someone who understood local processes. After they left, I checked my phone. Text from Peter asking if the commissioner had stopped by, offering again to help me understand the situation. He'd known they were coming. I spent 6 weeks preparing for a fight while maintaining normal operations. Every interaction with county officials got documented. I photographed every county vehicle on my property, requested copies of every public record related to the road project, the land acquisitions, Eckert's voting history, built a detailed timeline on poster board showing how the pieces connected. I learned what protections actually existed for working farms. North Carolina's present use value taxation program provided reduced property taxes for bona fide agricultural operations, which I'd been enrolled in for years. That enrollment created a paper trail documenting my farm's continuous agricultural use and requiring rollback taxes if the land was converted to non-agricultural purposes. The state's forestry management program provided additional classification that required the county to consider long-term timber value in any taking. My farm had an approved erosion control plan on file with the county soil and water district because of the steep terrain. Any road construction on my property would require updating that plan and demonstrating adequate sediment control measures. The mountain creek running through my lower section fed a watershed supplying drinking water to 3 communities downstream. State environmental regulations required formal consultation with downstream water authorities before approving projects that could affect drainage patterns or water quality. None of these were magic shields that would stop eminent domain cold, but each one created procedural requirements. Each requirement generated documentation and review periods. Each layer of complexity bought time and created obstacles for anyone trying to push through a fast taking. I started attending county commission meetings every Thursday night, sat in the same seat in the 3rd row where all 5 commissioners could see me watching them, brought a notebook, and wrote down everything that was said during discussions of the road project, land acquisitions, budget allocation. During public comment periods, I asked polite questions about the road project's environmental review status, the traffic studies justifying the new alignment rather than improving the existing road, the notification timeline for affected property owners, the methodology behind the cost-benefit analysis. The commissioners got visibly uncomfortable when I spoke. They'd shuffle papers, avoid eye contact, give vague answers that didn't address what I'd actually asked. Then I asked the question that changed everything. Keep your comments to the project, not personal allegations. Grimes cut in before I could finish. This is the project. Conflicts of interest are part of the project. Ortega leaned forward. Sir, state your question clearly. Why wasn't Commissioner Eckert recused when he has a disclosed financial relationship tied to the developer? That's not how this works, Eckert said. Grimes jumped back in. Out of order. Direct complaints through proper channels. I stayed calm. Said I wasn't making accusations. I was asking about ethics compliance based on the commissioner's own filed disclosures. The public had a right to understand whether recusal protocols were being followed. Grimes said the chair could rule me out of order if this constituted harassment. Ortega looked around the room, then said she'd allow the question if I could cite the specific document. I'd brought copies. I read from Eckert's annual disclosure identifying his consulting relationship with Blue Ridge Advisory Group, including compensation range. Then from state corporate records showing Blue Ridge as a wholly owned subsidiary of Consolidated Mountain Properties. Then noted that Consolidated Mountain was the primary beneficiary of the proposed road alignment, according to their own filed development plans. Eckert's face went red, said there was no conflict. His consulting work was unrelated to transportation. Blue Ridge provided services to multiple clients. I asked what services Blue Ridge provided that were unrelated to real estate development, given that its parent company's sole business was real estate development. Grimes interrupted again. Inappropriate. Potentially defamatory. Move to next item. Ortega hesitated, then said the question deserved an answer, given the documentation I'd cited. Two other commissioners nodded. Eckert said he'd provide written clarification through proper channels. The meeting moved on. But I'd made my point on the official minutes. Several people in the gallery had been taking notes. A reporter from the local weekly approached me in the parking lot asking for copies. Other property owners found me afterward. Nora, who ran a small apple orchard that would be bisected by the proposed alignment. Tom and Betty Aldridge, whose family had farmed this area for 4 generations and now faced losing a third of their property. A retired teacher named Margaret, who'd spent her savings building a dream home. A young couple, Jake and Melissa Warren, who'd bought property the previous year and were blindsided. All had received similar letters about property line discrepancies. All had been visited by county officials. All had been given lowball verbal offers and told to consult with people who understood local processes. We started meeting weekly at Nora's farmhouse kitchen, sharing documents and comparing timelines. 6 families total. Together, our properties covered almost the entire proposed corridor. Peter's name appeared throughout the documentation. He'd contacted 3 of the families offering to help them understand their options. He'd been the buyer's agent on Consolidated Mountain purchases near 2 of the targeted parcels. Harper noticed I was distracted, working late in my office, taking calls I'd step outside to answer, attending evening meetings I didn't fully explain. She asked what was going on. I told her about the coalition, the pattern we'd documented, the evidence showing Peter was deeper into this than just taking random real estate listings. Showed her the specific transactions with his name, the timeline showing coordination. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said Peter had called her that afternoon. He'd asked specific questions about our situation, whether we'd hired a lawyer yet, what our plans were, what timeline we were working on. She'd answered without thinking much about it because he was family asking about family. I told her I understood, but asked her not to share information about our legal strategy with him anymore, because there was clear evidence Peter was working with the people on the other side of this. Anything she told him would likely reach the county and the developer within hours. She agreed, but I could see it bothered her. The formal eminent domain notice arrived 8 weeks after my first commission meeting appearance. Certified mail, official county seal, dense legal language citing public necessity for transportation infrastructure improvement. The county declared urgent need for a portion of my property. They gave me 30 days to respond to their compensation offer, or they'd proceed with formal condemnation. I found Miriam through a property rights legal organization in Raleigh. She specialized in eminent domain abuse cases and had won significant judgments against counties across North Carolina. She asked detailed questions about my creek and whether there'd been any state environmental consultation for the road project. When I said no, she nodded and said the county's environmental documentation was suspiciously thin for a project affecting a protected watershed that supplied municipal drinking water downstream. She agreed to take my case. Miriam challenged the eminent domain on 3 grounds. First, the county failed to demonstrate genuine public necessity since the project primarily benefited private development interests. Second, the environmental review was incomplete and failed to include required consultations with downstream water authorities about watershed impacts. Third, Commissioner Eckert's ongoing participation, despite his financial relationships, created procedural defects tainting the entire approval process. She also filed discovery requests, demanding all communications between county officials and Consolidated Mountain Properties, all internal documents related to the project's cost-benefit justification, and all correspondence between Eckert and Blue Ridge Advisory. The county's response was immediate and coordinated. Within 2 weeks of our filing, 4 different agencies showed up: fire marshal, propane system, installation permits, distance from combustibles, health department, food service permits, preparation methods, temperature controls, building official, storage structure permits, setbacks, occupancy requirements, state agriculture, pesticide records, applicator certification, chemical storage. Each inspection hit during pre-season prep when I should have been finishing shearing and setting up for opening day. Each inspector asked questions that suggested someone had briefed them on weak points to probe. I handled each visit calmly, provided every document, made each inspector put findings in writing, built a file documenting the coordinated timing. None found violations. Permits current, records complete, facilities met code, but together they consumed 2 weeks of my schedule during the most critical time of year. Harper called me from work one afternoon, sounding confused. She said Peter had left her a voicemail asking detailed questions about our court filings. He'd mentioned Miriam by name, asked about specific motions we'd filed, asked about discovery requests. We hadn't told anyone outside the coalition about our legal strategy. I hadn't even told Harper which specific documents Miriam had submitted. She asked how Peter could possibly know those things. I said someone at the county or the developer's legal team was probably feeding him information because he was coordinated with them. Said this was exactly why I'd asked her to be careful what she shared. She was quiet. Then she said she hadn't told Peter anything about our legal filings. Said she'd kept her promise since our conversation. Said if Peter knew those details, he was getting them from somewhere inside the county's legal response entirely. That landed with her. Peter knowing things he couldn't have learned from Harper meant he had inside access to information being shared only between adversarial legal team, which meant he wasn't just a real estate agent who'd happened to take some listings. He was coordinated with the scheme at a deeper level than we'd understood. She said she wanted to talk to him directly and get answers. The Saturday before Thanksgiving was our busiest choose and cut day of the season. I'd been preparing for weeks, parking overflow areas marked with orange cones and rope barriers to keep vehicles off the lower field where younger trees were still maturing. Safety zone around the saw station clearly marked with yellow caution tape. Tags and pricing sheets organized by tree height in a weatherproof box. Cash box stocked with small bills for making change. Credit card reader charged and tested. Warming shed heated with the wood stove and stocked with hot spiced apple juice Harper had made from fresh pressed local apples and her own spice blend. Baked goods arranged on the display counter. Wreaths hung on the exterior walls where customers could browse while waiting. Customers started arriving at 9, right when we opened. Each group got a brief safety orientation at the check-in table. Never leave children unattended in the fields. Stay on marked paths between the rows. Watch for stumps and roots on the slopes. If using our hand saws, follow the cutting instructions posted at each saw station. 2 people should carry larger trees, 1 at each end. Carry with the trunk end forward, so branches don't catch on other trees and snap. I worked the field while Harper handled the store and checkout. Helped customers identify healthy specimens with good form and dense needle coverage. Answered questions about Fraser fir care after purchase. Keep the trunk in fresh water. Cut ½ an inch off the bottom before putting it in the stand. Keep away from heat sources. Shook loose needles from fresh cuts to demonstrate the tree was healthy and holding its needles properly. Tagged each customer's selection with their name and the price based on height. By early afternoon, we'd sold over 40 trees. The parking area was completely full, and I directed overflow to the designated area in the lower field where the ground was firm enough for vehicles. A family from Charlotte told me they'd been coming for 4 years and wouldn't consider buying their tree anywhere else now. A retired couple mentioned they'd read the newspaper article about our situation with the county and wanted to support someone standing up for property rights. Peter showed up unannounced around 3 o'clock, walked through the field toward me like he was inspecting inventory rather than visiting family, hands in his jacket pockets. He knew I couldn't make a scene with customers watching from every direction. He found me helping a customer load a 10-foot tree onto their SUV roof. He waited until the customer drove away, then started in on his pitch. Said he'd been thinking about our situation. Said he understood I felt strongly about the farm, but needed to consider Harper's future. Said the county's offer wasn't great, but he might be able to negotiate better terms if I'd let him help. I told him this wasn't the time or place. He kept talking. Said fighting the county was expensive and usually pointless. Said most people who resisted ended up with less than the original offer after legal fees ate up everything. Said he'd seen it happen many times. I asked him to leave. Said I had customers to help and this conversation was over. He left after looking around at my operation, my customers, my store, like he was assessing assets. Harper asked Peter directly about his involvement at a family dinner 2 weeks later. She told me about it that night. She'd started casual, asked how his business was going, whether the development deals were keeping him busy. He'd been normal, even bragging about commissions. Then she asked specifically about consolidated mountain properties and whether he was still doing work for them. His demeanor changed. He said he'd done some transactions for them, but it was standard agency work. She asked if those transactions had anything to do with the road project affecting our farm. He got defensive. Said she was starting to sound like me. Said he was trying to help the family and it was insulting to question his motives. She asked how he'd known about our court filings and our attorney's name when she hadn't told him anything. He said people talked. Small county. She said she hadn't told anyone about the specific motions filed. Nobody outside our legal team should have known those details unless they had access to the county's response documents. Peter changed approach. Said she needed to convince me to settle before I destroyed our finances. Said the county always won these fights. Said the smart move was taking the money. She asked why he cared so much about what we did with our own property. He said he cared about his sister's future. Then he said something that broke her trust completely. He said the road was going to happen regardless of what we did. Said the development was already funded and the approvals were essentially done. Said our property was going to be acquired one way or another. The only question was whether we got reasonable compensation or got dragged through court and ended up with less. She asked how he knew the development was already approved when the road project was supposedly still under review and the eminent domain was being challenged in court. He didn't have an answer. She came home that night and told me every word. Said Peter had talked about our property like it was already gone. The following Thursday evening, Peter showed up at our house while Harper was at her mother's. I was doing equipment maintenance when I heard his truck on the gravel. He knocked like he expected to be welcomed in. When I opened the door, he launched into his pitch. Said he cared about Harper and couldn't watch her husband destroy their future over stubbornness. Said the county had finalized their offer and it was the best I'd get anywhere. Said I needed to take it and let this be finished. I asked how much money he stood to make if Consolidated Mountains project went through. He didn't deny involvement. Said he was a professional doing legitimate business. Said the road was happening whether I liked it or not because the money was already committed. Said the smart move was getting the best deal instead of wasting everything on lawyers. Then he crossed a line. Look, I'm trying to save you from getting crushed. You're not saving me, you're selling me. You need to think about Harper. Don't use my wife like a bargaining chip. It'd be a shame if inspectors started caring a lot more during your busiest weeks. I told him I'd been recording since I opened the door. He laughed, said North Carolina was one-party consent and the recording wouldn't prove anything, except he'd tried to give good advice to stubborn family. I told him to leave and not come back. Said any future communication went through my attorney. Said if he came onto my property again, I'd file a trespassing complaint with the sheriff. He left, but sat in his truck at the end of my driveway for 15 minutes making phone calls. Harper got home around 11. I showed her the recording. Let her hear her brother threaten our livelihood, dismiss her concerns, reveal how deep he was in this. She sat on the couch with her hands pressed against her face. Didn't speak for a long time. Then she said she was done with him. I filed a trespassing complaint with the sheriff the next morning, documenting Peter's visit and his threats. Miriam added the recording to our court filings as evidence of coordinated intimidation connected to the eminent domain proceedings. She forwarded copies to the State Bureau of Investigation's Public Corruption Unit. The SBI opened a preliminary inquiry within 10 days. An investigator named Whitfield contacted Miriam requesting our complete documentation. The judge granted a preliminary injunction blocking all county action against our property until the legal questions were resolved. No seizure, no condemnation, no forced taking. Harper called her mother and explained she wouldn't attend family events where Peter was present. The conversation was brutal. Her mother cried, accused her of destroying the family over a land dispute. Harper told her mother that Peter had threatened their livelihood to close a business deal. Said she'd chosen her marriage over her brother's greed. She held that line even when it cost her. 3 weeks after the injunction, a lawyer for Consolidated Mountain called with a private settlement offer. Full market value based on independent appraisal, plus a premium for immediate agreement. Real money. More than I'd realistically make in 4 years of normal operation. The lawyer was professional. Said his client respected what I'd built. Said the offer had no connection to county proceedings, just a private transaction between willing parties. I told him I'd think about it. I spent a week considering. The money made financial sense. We could relocate, start fresh. But I also knew why they were offering. They needed my parcel specifically. Without my 15 acres, the whole corridor didn't connect. Every other piece they'd assembled was worthless if they couldn't get through my land to the highway. That's why they were willing to pay real money now, when the county had offered scraps before. I talked to the coalition. 2 others had received similar offers. Nora was considering acceptance because of health stress. Tom said taking the money would prove intimidation worked, and they'd do it to the next person. I thought about 14 years transforming worthless mountain land. about walking away because someone with more money wanted what I'd built. I called back and declined. Miriam had been cultivating media contacts. A reporter named Jackson Hale at the Asheville paper had been investigating regional corruption for years without finding enough documentation. Our case gave him everything. His article ran front page. Road project documents reveal developer ties to county officials. The timeline, acquisitions, Eckert's relationships, the pressure pattern. Peter's name appeared prominently as the agent facilitating developer purchases while pressuring his own family to surrender their property. That Christmas season was our best ever. People came specifically because they'd read the story. Families told us they were proud to support someone fighting back. We sold out weeks early. The commission held an emergency meeting in January. The room was packed beyond capacity, standing room only, with people lined up in the hallway. Local business owners who'd read the article, farmers who recognized the pattern, retirees who'd moved here specifically because they trusted the community. 3 major campaign donors sent letters withdrawing support from commissioners who'd backed the project. 4 commissioners voted to suspend the road project pending independent review. Eckert voted alone against, then held a press conference accusing colleagues of caving to media pressure. The public didn't buy it. Peter's professional life collapsed completely in the months following the article. In a county this small, reputation is everything. His listings dried up as sellers pulled their properties. Clients stopped returning calls. The local board of realtors opened a formal ethics inquiry after multiple complaints about his conduct in the scheme. Rather than face formal proceedings that would create detailed public record, Peter surrendered his real estate license voluntarily. The surrender stopped the formal process, but the inquiry remained in board record. Any future licensing application would require disclosure. He'd have to explain to any broker, any client, any partner. The professional damage was permanent. Harper's relationship with her mother eventually stabilized after months of painful conversation. Her mother finally accepted that Peter had become someone willing to hurt his own family for money. Said she didn't understand how that had happened to her son. The SBI investigation expanded quickly once they started pulling records. Subpoenas for financial records from Consolidated Mountain Properties, Blue Ridge Advisory Group, and Commissioner Eckert's personal bank accounts revealed the full scope of what had been happening. Eckert had received over $300,000 from developer-connected entities over a 4-year period. The payments were disguised as consulting fees for strategic advice, speaking honoraria for industry events that may or may not have actually occurred, and political contributions routed through PACs that were later traced back to Consolidated Mountain's principals. Bank records showed deposits hitting Eckert's accounts within days of key commission votes that advanced the road project at critical junctures. The emails were devastating. Communications between Eckert and the developer's representatives discussing which property owners were vulnerable to pressure, which ones needed aggressive tactics, and how to structure approvals to minimize scrutiny. Peter appeared in several threads as the contact for applying family pressure on our property. One message noted he'd assured them he could convince his sister's husband to see reason. The Attorney General's office got involved with local prosecutors once SBI had the financial records showing the scope of the scheme crossed multiple counties. They filed criminal charges against Eckert for bribery, corruption, and abuse of public office. The developer's CEO faced charges for conspiracy to commit bribery and making illegal payments to a public official. Peter was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in the public court filings. Being named in court documents created a permanent public record that any future employer, business partner, or licensing board would discover with a basic background search. The eminent domain case collapsed. The county filed to dismiss their own condemnation, acknowledging the project lacked legitimate purpose and the approval process was compromised. The judge granted dismissal with prejudice, meaning they could never refile. Miriam negotiated settlements for all coalition members, full reimbursement of legal fees, formal written apologies, policy reform commitments. My settlement totaled $41,000 for legal expenses alone. But the real victory wasn't the money. The county commission adopted new conflict of interest rules requiring recusal from any matter where officials had financial relationships with affected parties. They strengthened property owner protections for eminent domain proceedings. Eckert's trial lasted 2 weeks. Bank records, emails, testimony from county staff who'd been pressured to expedite approvals. The jury convicted on all counts after 4 hours of deliberation. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in state prison plus full restitution. The developer's company went into receivership. Their land holdings sold at auction for fractions of purchase prices. Conservation groups bought most of the parcels. Peter, last I heard, was doing property management work in Tennessee, not real estate sales. The licensing surrender and court naming followed him. No legitimate brokerage would take the liability risk of hiring someone with his documented history. Harper exchanges occasional texts with him about their mother's health. Nothing more. I expanded the operation the following spring, bought an adjacent 20 acres from the developer's bankruptcy auction at a fraction of what they'd paid, planted 4,000 new seedlings that will be ready in 8 years, built a larger farm store with proper commercial kitchen, hired full-time employees and seasonal workers. Harper and I came out stronger than we went in. The crisis forced conversations we'd been avoiding and decisions that proved where we stood. She chose our marriage over blood loyalty when it mattered. I showed I'd fight for what we built. 14 years ago, I bought steep mountain land nobody wanted. Everyone said I was throwing money away. I built something from nothing through work most people wouldn't have patience for. When my own brother-in-law tried to steal it through corruption and government abuse, I stayed calm, built a coalition, hired the right attorney, protected my marriage, and made every single person involved regret the day they decided my land looked like easy money. Some lessons cost more than others. Peter learned the expensive way that you don't target a man's land, his livelihood, or his family, especially when that man has spent 12 years building something he'll burn down the world to keep. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.